Well, this trip we are in the bus getting ready for the launch of Tech Expo. We are in Atlanta. I've actually suckered one of my best friends to help me out because he happens to live here in Atlanta. Benefit is he's retired, so I could tap him. But Harry and I have known each other, I don't know, 25 years now, I'm guessing.
At least,
At
yeah.
least. Harry and I did a bunch of big projects in the telecom arena, including the launch of OmniPoint in New York City, the first GSM carrier in the U.S., to the launch of Teligent, the fixed wireless CLEC in the late 90s. Harry's ex HP, ex Ericsson,
Ex-Deck, if you want to
ex
go back
DEC
that
before that, if
far.
you want to go back that far, the old DEC before it was acquired by HP. But Harry and I have jointly always had interesting conversations around technology and innovation, and particularly in creativity and how do you take an idea and make it real. Before we started recording, Harry and I were actually we're both grandfathers, so we do the grandpa comparison about what's going on with our grandkids and what do we do to encourage them on their own paths. But thought we'd just take this opportunity here in the bus before the show gets crazy with all the interviews, just to kind of catch up and see what you're up to. So what have you been up to? I know yesterday you were off hiking with the grandkids. I heard that story.
Yeah, grabbed them, went out for about a 5-hour walk up in the mountains. It was very enjoyable. Came back, had a simple meal,
Yeah.
and headed back.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I talk about this all the time about once you start having the grandkids, your priorities kind of shift to where your legacy really comes from. Whether is your legacy a product or a technology, or is it that investment into the next generation?
Yeah, and it's funny watching the kids grow over time. How you potentially guide them. It's like we were kind of joking around and says, what's a grandfather or a grampy supposed to do? Kids would come back, oh, you're supposed to spoil us. I said, no, we're supposed to tease you, toughen you up for later on in life. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I have 5. How many do you have now?
2.
2, and it is interesting as you watch them get older and they kind of get to that 9, 10, 11. And I don't think my parents saw this in me when I was growing up, but I see it in my grandkids. They get to that kind of 9, 10, 11 kind of cusp right there. And you just see this burst of ideas and creativity and want to go do things and experiment. And I've talked about this many times before about the challenge of today's society, technology, tablets, online schooling, where we just kind of like shut down that curiosity to where they just consume rather than create. And, for me, I'm trying to do as much as I can to encourage that curiosity. It's hard to do when you're competing against all the distractions.
The technology, yeah.
Yeah, well, you see the heads down on a phone. I mean, my grandkids think I'm the biggest ogre in the world because what I've done is I've become almost a nutcase about keeping them off of social media. So I actually, with my kids, I'll pay for things like their mobile phones, etc., as long as they do not allow the grandkids to be on social media specifically. There's more than enough time for that later in life. There's time when they're bubbling with these new ideas and this creativity and want to go invent. Now's the time for them not to be laying on the couch or watching YouTube videos all day long. It's about being outside.
Yeah, and it's about what they do with the technology, whether it's watching and reacting or just watching brain dead or getting involved with learning. The thing is, how do you make learning through technology fun?
Well, it's like, so Juliet, my granddaughter, she's number 3 of the 5. And she lives up in Washington. And she has created her own YouTube channel, and she does her own YouTube videos. And she streams when she's playing Fortnite or Roblox, right? But I've been encouraging her not to just do streaming of the gaming. What other things she could do on her YouTube channel? So I've been helping her with her YouTube channel, and actually for her birthday, the only thing she wanted was studio lights for her bedroom so she could have good lighting, good tripod, all those kinds. And I'm like, okay, here, let's go. Come on, I'll get that for you. Let's create, invent, share. Versus you just don't be a consumer, be a creator. That's my mantra.
Yeah, and the other point is that, the technology like all this is here, but my oldest granddaughter will actually work with clay.
Yeah.
So it's how do you get involved with the physical aspects of it and develop those motor skills and those creativity skills of just using something very simple and creating something from it. So that, it's kind of another way of looking at, okay, technology brings you down one path, but your physical creativity with stuff.
Well,
it's like kind of what we were talking about, the little rascals.
Yeah.
Going to the dump and collecting a bunch of stuff and making a card out of it.
Yeah. Well, or how many kids and their fathers teach them how to change the oil in the car and how to rebuild an engine and all those kinds of things. In my case, like Liam, he's the oldest of the boys. He's number 2 of the 5. Lives in Colorado, lives fairly close. 3 years ago, he asked for a Glowforge Pro laser cutter. And so my wife and I talked about it, and we're kind of like, yeah, okay. He didn't have any, I had never had anything like that, so you're never quite sure, is this just a passing fancy, or is he really going to get into it? Oh my gosh, I've created a monster. This kid is like a whiz at this. And he has his own business now. He's got his own website. He sells online. He'll do custom designs. I don't think you can't see it on the video, but the Innovators Network is cut acrylic, multicolor cut acrylic that he did on his Glowforge for the bus here. It's kind of a little bit of a thank you to me. The joke is I've been trying to teach him how to calculate profit, right? So sitting down with him, I'm like, so how much did the supplies cost you, for the acrylic and that kind of stuff? And he looks at me and he goes, 0. I go, how does the supplies cost you 0? And he goes, oh, Papa, you pay for it all. You may not know about it, but your credit card's buying all my acrylic for my business, right? Which I thought was hilarious that he's at least aware of it. But he is so creative. And then I've got, some of the Olivia, very creative artist, drawer type of, and I mean, every one of the grandkids has a different skill set.
Yeah.
And how do you support it? How do you encourage it? Because I am fearful of the next generation of innovators, right? Coming through the educational system. Because we no longer have art, music, the things that were the creative outlets for the kids to be able to experiment. Like you try art. I was never very good at art until Mrs. Diaz, my art teacher in 7th grade, got me to do linoleum cut block. And I did a linoleum cut block. I can even tell, I still have it. It sits in my office, of a dragon head that turned out, I don't know where it came from. And I won all kinds of art awards for that. And that just kind of unleashed this graphic side of me, which then ultimately led for me to go to college originally as an architecture major before I moved to computer science. And when you take those things out of the public school system, that means it's on the parents and the grandparents to put that back in because they're not getting it in the school system.
Yeah. It's almost like getting them involved in a team sport even.
Yes.
So they're very individually focused on what they have to do, but how can I work together to produce something?
Teamwork, collaboration.
Yeah.
Where do you learn that?
Oh, it's like your grandson about creating the sign like that. not knowing about the finances, but there could be someone else who says, I can put together the finance. I understand that piece.
Well, this gets back. You and I were just talking about this earlier about, the reason I think you and I teamed up in the business world and then became long-term friends was we had complementary skill sets,
Yep.
right? And, if you look at like Bill Hillett and David Packard, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, you look at, Bill Gates, Paul Allen, you look at anybody that's had achieved some form of success, it's that partnership, the partnership that's complementary. But how do you, is there a way to learn how to find that partner or who makes a good partner? I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody I don't know if there's a checklist because we're all so unique and so different. But like you said, though, putting the kids team sports, learning that, okay, one kid's really good at quarterback. Some guy's really good at playing the center. My old Audrey, she does volleyball. She's very tall. She's as tall as my wife, so she's tall as grandma. So everybody's doing different things with different abilities and seeing their own worth, but knowing, being self-aware that there's a gap, find somebody who fills their gap.
Well, and a lot comes with observation of people and watching them and understanding that person and say, they need help in this area, and I think we give that person a little help in that area, they'll bloom. So it's understanding and watching and figuring out, if I add a little water here, what would happen? Or if I little incense here, what would happen? Or a little guidance here, what would happen?
Well, just think about it. How many of us chose our career, achieved our success because we received encouragement from somebody, right? There's this popular thing on YouTube now where people go back to thank a teacher that encouraged them back when they were in school. It was the first time they really got told, you're good at something. You're really good at this. Wow, you're doing amazing in these areas, right? And I think it doesn't matter whether you're a kid or an adult, right? The reaction to encouragement is tangible. Yeah. You feel it, you see it. We tend to run that negative storyline in our head. I'm not good enough. I'm faking it. The whole imposter syndrome thing. But having someone externally say, wow, you're really good at that, that's what can transform people.
And I'm kind of difficult wording this, but things change over time.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden we've got another generation of kids who've been playing these games, and it's what I call the instant gratification.
Right. It's all about the dopamine hit.
Yeah. So how do the older people understand that culture and helping them go forward based upon how they need that instant gratification or whatever?
Well, it gets back, the challenge I think that comes from that's the manifestation of that is the lack of attention span. Right? I jokingly tell my team I work with is the CEO for Cable Labs about, senior leaders inside of organizations tend to have the attention span of a gnat. Me included as a CEO. You got so much stuff going on. But you see it all the way down through kids these days, right? Deep thinking is just not a skill set for a lot of people. And how do you teach that? And how do you reveal to people the value of that, truly understanding? And don't take the superficial. Social media. Don't believe everything on the internet, right? Look at the next level of detail. Is it true or can it be proven? But this whole, lack of attention span of, I want, 90-second, YouTube reels. I don't want to watch an 8-minute YouTube video. Too long. I'm not going to watch that. I want the 90 seconds. Snip, 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 snip. Right? And we get into doom scrolling as we're going to bed at night. Right? How do you, I don't know. I just worry about, and I don't know, maybe I'm the doom and gloom from my grandparents probably thought the same thing of me, when I first got into computers, that things weren't going to work out and I was going to get sucked into that device, and I wasn't going to know how to, milk a cow or, saddle a horse.
Make soap.
Yeah.
But even then, we're what, 2 generations away now. We grew up with a set of values, different set of values growing up. There are different ways of solving problems based upon technology and knowledge and all that.
Well, there was a number of years ago, I started a little bit of work, and there's a couple of YouTube videos I published way, way back then about creative grandkids and what could aunts, uncles, and grandparents do to actually encourage the creativity of their kids. Didn't really go anywhere. It got a little bit of a reaction, but it really didn't kick off anything. But you are seeing it more and more. Like I go to 4-H to support Liam and Olivia, and they're very active in 4-H in Colorado, and I get queried by their parents or their grandparents about what could they do to encourage the creativity of their grandkids or their kids. I think it's no longer the school systems. It's really the parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, adults who have the ability to influence the next generation.
Yeah.
That's where that encouragement has to come from.
You mentioned something about innovation, but there's also problem solving.
Yeah.
So I was watching my daughter with her kids the other day, and they love climbing trees. And she says, remember, you climb up, you climb down. Your problem. So my youngest went up to a tree, and she's looking at it. She says, Grandpa, you need to help me up to this tree. And I said, no. She said, well, I can't get up this way. I said, well, step back and take a bigger picture of it. Bigger view. She steps back, and I said, not only step back, but walk around. She starts walking around. She goes, oh. She found a way to get up the tree from the backside. And then up she went, and down she came. So it's teaching them to step back and then maybe take a different approach.
Well, and also experiment, and if you fail, short of you like really hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Right? But failure is not a negative. For some reason, we've gotten this thought in our head where we can't let our kids fail. They only have to experience success, and that does not prepare for problem solving
or innovation.
Right.
Because innovation, you're gonna fail.
Yeah.
You're gonna fail.
Better fail 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
If you're not failing 9 out of 10 times, then you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem is with today's businesses, if you fail at something, that is treated as sometimes an extreme negative, which will then mean I'm not going to try again.
Right. And that's where a lot of organizations who say they want to be innovation driven, but their actions say something completely differently. And they're not focused on innovation.
And potentially this innovation will come to them and they'll say, but I'm making a pie. Where does this fit within my pie? And we're not doing pie here. We're actually doing bread this time. It's still something to eat. Think outside your pie box.
Yeah. Well, and it gets interesting about the whole issue of experiencing failure. Someone was asking me just the other day about, where did I learn leadership skills? I said, well, it wasn't in college. I never finished college. So that wasn't,
Me too.
Yeah, right. But the thing I credit my leadership skills and experience from was from Boy Scouts. Because Boy Scouts, so 11 to 18-year-olds, a good Boy Scout group is really run by the youth, not by the adults. The adults are only there to backstop it, but it's really run by the youth. The youth have to set the meetings, they have to organize the campouts, they have to organize the procurement of the food, the assignment of tasks, all the things you would want to learn. Now, the benefit of Boy Scouts is you can fail and you're backstopped. But if you fail, it's not like, oh my gosh, you're going to screw your career up or, your perception or whatever. Every kid every 14, 15-year-old kid planning a camp out menu is going to screw up, right? But let me tell you, ask them when they're 40 what happened in Boy Scouts. They'll remember that screw up and what they learned from it and the fact that it wasn't negative. They learned that it wasn't negative and they just learned and made it better the next time.
Right.
That's what we're missing in things like internships and mentoring programs. How do we give structured innovation approaches that don't come down like a hammer when someone screws up? And I think in some cases it comes from the top. It's the leaders who don't understand empathy when it comes to the innovation activities.
Yeah. It's like, hey, did you ever screw up when you were this age?
Yeah, so
a lot of times.
So I think programs like Boy Scouts, 4-H, other youth-driven, activities where the youth are truly the leadership brings huge value in preparing. I'm an Eagle Scout. That's one of the reasons, if you go and you read about, Eagles or whatever, it's, 0.02% of the world population are Eagles. Yet 21% of senators are Eagles. 19% of all the incoming class to West Point are Eagles, right? If you look at how many billionaires are Eagles, it's off the scale, right? Because I think it's that leadership, learn, try, fail safely, and having that environment. And if your kids or grandkids don't have access to that, then how do you replace that? Replace it with your own activities. But, I think having that experience in a safe environment where it's not a critical thing, failing in the classroom these days is critical.
Yeah.
I didn't pass the test, right? So I got a bad grade. Right? How do you create that? I don't, So, like I said, I was asked recently about what did I credit for my leadership learnings, and I would give a big chunk of that to the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. With me, it was the Army.
Yeah.
So it was, I was lucky when I went in, the good NCOs were still from the old brown boot army, they called it.
Yep.
These are the guys who came out through World War I, Korea, and all that. So you learned a lot of good lessons from them. It's like they'd come in and they'd say, the colonel would say, take that hill. And so being a young guy, stuff like that, grab your weapon and you start going to the hill and charge up. And the brown boot guys would say, what the hell do you think you're doing? Think you're in the Marines? You're in the Army. Sit down. Let's figure this out.
Yeah.
So they'd say, what do you know about the hill? Have you done any recon? Do you have any pictures of it? Do we know what's there? Do we know how much we need to take the hill? So they went through the process of figuring out what the objective is, what your resources you currently have, and can you take it with the current resources? If there's a gap, how do you fill that gap?
Well, not only that, I've always been impressed with guys that have come out of, like, particularly the Army, about the understanding of supply. You can't push a unit to go take the hill and not think about the secondary issues like, okay, are we going to have enough food up there to take care of them? Are we going to have enough ammunition to take, so they don't think about just the end result. It's everything to keep it a sustained effort over an extended period of time. And a lot of leaders, evident by what happened with COVID and all the screw-ups in supply chain, right?
Yeah.
If you don't think about that, you're not a leader. You haven't lived it.
Supply chain to the Army is, it's a godsend.
Yeah.
If it's there, you're fantastic. If it's not there, you're screwed.
Yeah. And they understand that.
Yeah.
It's not just about the people, but it's about you got to supply them.
And it's also understanding the people. It's like Patton. He knew how to attack. He knew how to run campaigns. But if you asked him to defend a place, he was lost. He had no clue of how to do that. So you had to put the right people in at the right time at the right place.
Well, this gets back to complementary skills.
Yeah.
If anybody thinks they can do it all, particularly in the innovation space, that you're so smart that you're going to be the sole founder, you're missing something. I I mean, now I'm doing these mentoring programs on a service on an app called Intro, right? So people can schedule a time with me and give them feedback. And one of my first questions on the first call on Intro is, who's your co-founder, right? And it forces self-awareness. Like, what's your strength? What's your co-founder's strength? What's your weakness? Are your co-founder's strengths complementary to your weakness? Right? Back to you and I, right? I think, why did we have such good success at OmniPoint, Intelligent, and all these other big programs? Because our skill sets are completely different.
Yeah.
Right? Yet completely complementary. Right? And I think people figuring that out and figuring out how to leverage that's part of leadership.
Yeah. I think what you and I had in common was, we'd sit down there, we'd look at it and say, what's going to bite us in the bum?
Yeah, well.
And try to get ahead of that.
Well, we were also pretty fluid at, okay, yeah, that's yours. Yep, this is mine. We would divvy it up based on our skill sets, what each one of us would drive in order, and 100% complete transparent trust. You didn't have to look over your shoulder. You knew the other person was going to deliver.
Yeah, that was something we brought to the table that people had a hard time understanding when we first started it. It was, to give you a picture of it, we basically had meetings once or twice a week where we brought in the key staff, and it was a stand-up meeting. We had all the pertinent issues written on a whiteboard, and we used to review them. The goal there was to make sure everyone understood the big picture. The goal there was to understand if there was a problem, anyone in the room could bring the problem to the group. And once it's brought to the group, it's not their problem anymore. It's the group's problem to solve. Once we got that understanding of trust, the relationship seemed to change and everyone started trusting each other.
Yep.
And these are 20 or 30 different vendors at the same time working with each other.
Well, not only that, take OmniPoint as a proof point. What was the average age of an employee at OmniPoint? Maybe early 30s?
If that, yeah.
If that, late 20s? I mean, this was a young, high risk, like off the scale, high risk, right? And in many cases, these kinds of projects where you're transforming an entire industry and an entire country, just for those of you who don't know, OmniPoint is what became T-Mobile. So today, if you have T-Mobile as your service, this was what we launched in New York under OmniPoint. T-Mobile was a major investor into that project. But those kinds of projects where you're basically birthing an industry and birthing a capability happens, if you're lucky, once in your entire career. And these people that signed on understood that. It was highly motivating. But when everybody's new, everybody there less than a year, they had not worked with each other before, yet could establish that kind of trust. That, I think, is what's missing in a lot of what goes on today. Everybody's so suspectful of everybody else.
And there was another point to that, is that a lot of the people that came in were used to an operation ongoing that was already functioning. They weren't used to coming in and starting up an organization. It's like coming in and starting up a finance department, coming in and starting up a call center, coming in and starting up a billing center. So it was part of getting him to think of, how do you build something that you already know how to operate?
Yeah, well, in this case, AT&T had been around for hundreds of years. Verizon had been, well, Verizon wasn't even around then. It was still Bell Atlantic, I think, at the time, right?
Yeah.
So we still had Bell South. We had, the individuals. Those companies have all been around for hundreds of years. So you couldn't hire anybody that says, "Oh, hire the person who started the billing platforms at AT&T." They long dead. So you couldn't leverage history. You had to come in completely new, blank sheet, build from scratch. And that scares a lot of people when I don't know how to do this. Well, guess what? Nobody else in the entire world knows how to do this.
Right.
We got to go figure this out.
And oh, by the way, when you have to make a decision, it's usually with incomplete information.
Oh, yeah.
And the hardest thing we had at the time was getting people to make a decision without all that information. And the decision had to be made on that Friday. Come that Friday, I need more information. I said, you're not going to get any.
Yeah. Take your best guess.
Yep.
And then execute and then correct.
Right. And if later on it turns out it was the wrong decision, not a problem. We all make it. We'll back up, readdress it, and go forward. Yeah. And that's where we're saying, sometimes we're going to fail, but the thing is to make sure it's to identify the failure fast enough, you can roll it back.
Well, this gets back to the whole issue of how do we encourage kids and grandkids and next generation of innovators to be comfortable with failure. What happens today, a lot of times, if there's a failure, people try to hide it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can't. No.
Or walk away in shame.
Walk away, or they just self-select out. Yeah. People basically destroy themselves mentally. Oh, I failed. I let everybody down. I'm no good. And they exit out.
Yeah.
Because the key here is how do you, how do you encourage transparency?
Mm.
I don't know about you, but my grandkids are very transparent with me. They may not be as transparent with their parents, but they're very transparent to me. Because they know there's no repercussions if they tell me something.
What is it the grandparents and the kids have in common? They have a common enemy.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But getting back to that decision process or, making the decision, when you're doing a startup like that, you have to make a decision and incomplete data. It has to be made because lack of a decision drives other issues and problems.
Yep.
But it's to help that person with the decision. Once the decision made, it's the group's charter to go forward with that, to support that decision. It's not just that one person standing alone.
Well, it's really the focus on team. It's not the individual.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, for instance, if you go back to OmniPoint and you and I, in fact, you'll see Mark Trudeau's here this week, here in Atlanta. Right? And I see him all the time because he founded a company that's very active in the broadband, but he was part of the OmniPoint team. Lauren will be here, right?
Oh,
so
Susie too?
I don't know if Susie will be here, but I know Mark. Mark I want to see every September in New York at Diversity Week for our industry. But but if you ask Mark or Lauren, right, name the one person for OmniPoint that became T-Mobile. You can't, because there isn't one person. Probably the closest would be George.
Yeah.
George Schmidt, who actually created Monosmon in Germany.
Yep.
Right? So the very first European GSM operator before he became, but he's probably the highest profile. He's probably the closest. But even George wouldn't stand up and say he was the guy. The culture had to be, and this has to be the culture in any innovation effort. It's not about the individual. It's about the team.
Yeah. He understood that.
Yes. Because again, it goes back to we're all unique, we're all different, we all come from backgrounds. But team also means you have an incredible amount of trust and self-awareness. What are you good at? What are you not good at? If you're in a jam, it isn't a negative to raise your hand and say, I need help. I've got this issue coming up and I don't know how to address it. So.
Good times.
Yep. Well, as we wrap it up, because we're already at 35 minutes on this.
Oh, smokes.
So it goes by fast, I'm telling you. So, hey, Harry, thanks a lot for stopping by and agreeing to sit in the chair and have this conversation. We'll see what the response is, but it gives you, the listener, a little bit of an insight in just the casual conversation, a little bit of the history that some of you have asked about. So I thought doing it with Harry, since Harry's known me longer than just about everybody. And again, Harry, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Anytime.
Sure thing. So with that, we will wrap this up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Catch you later. Bye-bye.